Hey guys, it's Destiny, and with the release of Honkai Star Rail's biggest update, which I'm super excited about by the way, and I hope you are as well, we have our first character of 2.0, which is the very pretty and also very purple Black Swan. I mean, she literally has a Black Swan in one of her trailers too, so I think the name is pretty fitting. I'll be going over everything you guys need to know about her in this video, which ranges from her kit, how to play her, best builds, and my personal thoughts on her as a character now that she is out. Also, make sure to subscribe and leave a like on the video to win your 50/50 on Black Swan, and the source is definitely to trust me on this one. Without further ado though, let's talk about Black Swan.
A dazzling item. Are you looking for its owner?
Let's start off with going over the basics of Black Swan. Black Swan is our newest Wind Nihility character, which reminds me of another certain character. I'm sorry, Sampo, I love you, but I have to let Black Swan shine today. Black Swan takes damage over time to a whole new level with her ability Arcana. She's able to inflict Arcana, which is considered its own form of damage over time, onto enemies, and this is stackable, which the more stacks you have, the more bigger the damage with her tarot card. Arcana can be inflicted numerous ways, which is her technique at the start of the battle, which can inflict numerous stacks, her basic attacks, her skill, which also does a defense drop onto the main target and adjacent enemies, and every time an enemy target receives damage over time at the start of their turn, there's a chance for them to also be inflicted with Arcana. Allies who trigger damage over time onto an enemy can also help with Arcana stacks. Also, every time Black Swan hits an enemy that has Bleed, Wind Shear, Shock, or Burn, she can additionally stack Arcana onto them per damage over time debuff respectively, which can result in numerous additional stacks with her basic attack or skill depending on how many forms of damage over time you have on the enemy. Arcana can also be stacked up to 50 times, by the way, and the multiplier gets pretty nuts the more stacks you have. At 3 stacks of Arcana, Arcana will deal wind damage over time onto adjacent enemies and also have a chance of inflicting Arcana onto them. And at 7 or more Arcana stacks, the current damage over time applied onto enemies will ignore 20% of their defense and adjacent enemies' defense, which is very strong, especially with how much she can already reduce enemy defenses with her skill as well. Your Arcana stacks will reset though once an enemy's turn begins, with the exception though of how her ultimate works, which is her ultimate helps your Arcana stack count, as the stack count will not reset after an enemy gets hit with Arcana. You will be able to continue your stacks until the enemy's following turn, which can result in you getting a bunch of additional stacks onto the enemy for a huge explosive attack once that enemy's turn happens again. Also, her ultimate causes Epiphany on enemies, which increases the damage an enemy takes during their turn by 25%, so mainly referring to that damage over time, since it would be during their turn. And her stacks will be considered Bleed, Wind Shear, Burn, and also Shock, which is really good for getting even more stacks. I know that was a lot, but Arcana is literally Black Swan's main source of damage, which makes her a pretty backloaded unit overall. But it's definitely worthwhile with how much damage Arcana can do, because this is just super powerful. And of course, with all the numerous ways you can inflict it, it'll make it pretty nice when it comes to team building. As for Black Swan's traces though, they're pretty nice, as they'll be able to increase her damage by up to 72% at all times, by the way, based on 60% of her effect hit rate. So if we did quick math, you'll basically want 120% effect hit rate on Black Swan. Her skill will also have a chance to inflict an additional Arcana stack if an enemy has Burn, Bleed, Wind Shear, or Shock per debuff respectively, as I mentioned a little earlier. And her last trace allows allies who trigger damage over time onto enemies to have a chance to inflict 3 additional Arcana stacks onto an enemy, which those 3 stacks are pretty nice overall. It can definitely help you consistently get those 7 stacks every single time when an enemy's turn actually happens. She will also get 28% attack, 14.4% wind damage, and 10% effect hit rate from her chases, so her base kit is pretty stacked, honestly. And when it comes to playing Black Swan, you'll want to prioritize getting as many Arcana stacks as you can, which is easier when you have another damage over time character on the team. Black Swan can go numerous ways with her rotation, but you'll want to skill with her on her first action so that she can inflict a defense drop onto enemies for 3 turns. From there, you could do a mixture of basic attacks and skill, depending on your skill points available on your team. If you do use her skill every attack though to get more Arcana stacks also on those adjacent enemies, you'll be able to get a 4-turn ultimate since her energy cost is 120, but with certain builds, you can get a 3-turn ultimate, which I'll get into later in the video. When it comes to using Black Swan's ultimate though, ideally you want to do this when there's a good gap between your characters and the enemies going again in a turn cycle. Since your goal with using the ultimate is to take advantage of being able to accumulate a bunch of Arcana stacks, so ideally you'd want this gap in order to get as many stacks as you can before they have their turns, just to get the Arcana stacks as high as you can, of course as shown with the gameplay I'm showing you guys here. But now let me get into some teammates and team concepts I really like with Black Swan.
A dazzling item. Are you looking for its owner?
So when it comes to teams I like, or just concepts in general, I really like Black Swan alongside 1 to 2 damage over time characters, supportive characters as well for more buffs, and of course sustain. Unless your characters are decked out with their builds, then you might be able to get away with no sustain if you have a pretty strong synergistic team. Some partners I love with Black Swan would be Kafka, since Kafka can re-trigger damage over time consistently and takes advantage of Black Swan's kit very well, and these two are literally like bread and butter when it comes to damage over time playstyle. And Black Swan is definitely one of Kafka's best partners for sure. Other characters I like with Black Swan are Guinaifen, Sampo, and also Luca. They work very well with allowing Black Swan to gain more Arcana stacks, and all of them have their own perks within their kit to either improve team damage or dot damage potential. Some fun partners though are Welt, Rodmay, Tingyun, Asta, and so on. Welt is really nice for delaying enemies in turn order, so when you use Welt to delay enemies, this can give Black Swan more time to accumulate Arcana stacks on the enemy. Rodmay is great for increasing team damage and also increasing weakness breaking efficiency for the team. This can allow you to break enemies more often and inflict forms of break damage over time onto enemies as well. Tingyun is great for increasing an ally's attack, damage, and also giving energy to an ally, which can help with team rotations, especially if she also has Dance 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 equipped. Asta, same case with Dance Dance Dance. She's a great character for being able to increase the attack, speed of allies by a massive amount, and your teammates will be able to go more frequently in turn cycles, and if your allies are able to go more, this can help with more Arcana stacks. Plus the attack buffs are really nice for benefiting damage over time potential. Plus, Asta can also inflict burn onto enemies, which this could be a nice plus for the damage over time playstyle. I will say she definitely excels in a comp that focuses primarily on getting her Arcana stacks as high as possible. Now though, let's go over her builds, and then lastly my review on her overall as a character.
A dazzling item. Are you looking for its owner?
When it comes to building Black Swan, honestly, I would recommend the 4-piece Prisoner in Deep Confinement set the most over anything else. It increases her attack by 12%, and it would allow her to ignore up to 18% of an enemy's defense if there are 3 damage over time stacks on an enemy. Paired with her other forms of ignoring defense, this is very strong on her. And if you don't have this set, you can use the Musketeer of Wildwheat or Eagle of Twilight Line set in the time being. As for her planar sets, I recommend the Glimmoth set if you can reach 160 speed in battle, which can be easier to do with characters who buff up your speed on your team. Pan Cosmic for the additional effect hit rate, which is one of Black Swan's most important stats to build, and also you can get up to a 25% attack increase. And for my final recommendation, if you don't have these 2 sets, I'd go with the Space Station set for the 24% attack boost. For main stats, you'll want to prioritize effect hit rate body piece, since your goal is at 120% effect hit rate, speed or attack boost, but preferably speed though if you don't have a consistent speed buffer on the team. Wind or attack orb, either one of these is honestly fine. It more so depends on your team comp as to which one you may want more. If you have a bunch of damage boosts from teammates, then you may want to consider an attack orb. But if you have a bunch of attack boosts, then the wind orb is more than likely ideal. But honestly, either one is very good on her. Lastly, attack rope. For subsets, you need to prioritize effect hit rate until you have 120, either with a mixture of a light cone and relic sets, and then you will want attack percentage and speed, and these 3 will be your main important subsets to look at when it comes to building Black Swan. As for light cones, her best options will be her signature light cone Reforged Remembrance, which gives her 40% effect hit rate, and she'll be able to easily get the maximum stacks of profit very early into battle, which allows her to increase her attack by 20%, and damage over time will ignore 28.8% defense as well. Which honestly, at this point, this results in her being defense ignore Swan, which is kind of nuts with how much defense she's going to be ignoring with this light cone. Another option I heavily recommend is Eyes of the Prey, as it'll give Black Swan 40% effect hit rate and also increase dot damage by 48%, which is great for her backloaded damage. Another great light cone option is a new free-to-play light cone, It's Showtime. This light cone is amazing for Black Swan since she can highly benefit from the trick stacks, which can allow her to get 30% damage increase, and also a 36% attack increase due to her having over 80% effect hit rate. The only thing you need to keep in mind of though with this icon that may be a little bit more tough is that you will need more effect hit rate substats in order to reach that 120% threshold. Before the tutorial mission begins though is also a nice consideration. Increases her effect hit rate by 40% similarly to Eyes of the Prey and Reforged Remembrance, and before the tutorial mission begins we'll be able to grant you a 3-turn ultimate, which is nice for more frequent epiphany uptime on enemies. A good amount of the other Nihility Lycones are also pretty nice options, so there's quite a few options to use overall on Black Swan. Now that we've gone over how to build Black Swan though, let's go over my thoughts on her value.
A dazzling item. Are you looking for its owner?
Since we've gone over the essentials of Black Swan, what teams I like her on, her builds, it's time to discuss her pros and cons, and ultimately her value. Think of this as the before you pull segment of the review. The benefits of Black Swan is her incredible damage potential with Arcana, how she upgrades damage over time comps, and also how she became Kafka's new best friend. Black Swan is great for those who do enjoy her playstyle in the aspect of ramping up her Arcana stacks and getting a big boom with her Arcana. Her cons though can be seen as how she may feel a bit more niche than some of our other playable characters, as well as if you don't like her backloaded playstyle, then it might be harder for me to recommend her. So ultimately, it just comes down on your interest in her character design, playstyle as well, and if it outweighs your interest in future characters such as Sparkle, Acheron, and so on. I will say though on my end, I'm definitely a huge fan of her since I love the damage over time playstyle, plus she's primarily purple, which is my favorite color, so she definitely gets brownie points on my end. That'll be all though for my guide and review on Black Swan. I hope you guys enjoyed, and let me know if you guys plan to pull for Black Swan. Make sure to subscribe and also leave a like to support the video, and I hope you all enjoy version 2.0. Have fun everyone, and have a great one. Peace.